The Lone Operative. The desolate world of Krell-9 hung like a bruised peach in the inky void of space. Its atmosphere, choked with sulphurous clouds, obscured most of the planet's surface from prying eyes. This made it the perfect hiding spot for one of the Zarkai Empire's most closely guarded secrets. Petty Officer Jack Harper peered through the scope of his long-range scanner, his lips pressed into a thin line. The device, a marvel of human engineering, could penetrate the thick atmosphere and provide detailed surface imagery. What Jack saw made his blood boil. Sprawling across a barren valley was a massive compound. High walls bristling with energy weapons surrounded a collection of utilitarian buildings. But it was the figures moving between those structures that held Jack's attention. Hundreds, maybe thousands of aliens shuffled about in clear states of distress. Their slender forms and iridescent skin marked them as members of the Lyrian species. Slave labor, Jack muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, just like Intel suspected. The Zarkai Empire was known for its brutality, but direct evidence of their atrocities had been hard to come by. Until now. Jack's mission had been simple: scout the edges of Zarkai space and gather intelligence on their military capabilities. Stumbling upon a secret slave camp wasn't part of the plan, but it changed everything. Jack lowered his scanner and took a deep breath of recycled air from his stealth suit. He was alone on this barren rock, over 50 light-years from the nearest human outpost. His ship, a state-of-the-art scout vessel, was hidden in a nearby ravine. The smart move would be to log the discovery and retreat to human space with the intel. But as Jack watched the Lyrians toil under the harsh gaze of their Zarkai overseers, he knew he couldn't just walk away. The Lyrians were a peaceful, psychically gifted race. They had been one of the first alien species to make contact with humanity, and their gentle nature had helped ease humanity's transition onto the galactic stage. Seeing them reduced to slaves struck at Jack's core. "Looks like this mission just got a lot more complicated," Jack muttered to himself. He began to formulate a plan, his mind racing through possibilities. A frontal assault was out of the question. Even with his advanced gear, he was just one man against an entire Zarkai garrison. He needed to be smart, to use every trick and tool at his disposal. Jack spent the next several days observing the camp, learning its rhythms and weaknesses. He noted guard patrol patterns, mapped out blind spots in their sensor grid, and identified potential allies among the Lyrian prisoners. All the while, he wrestled with the enormity of what he was considering. A rescue attempt of this scale, deep in enemy territory, was unprecedented. On the 5th day, as Krell-9's weak sun dipped below the horizon, Jack made his decision. He activated his suit's secure comm system, bouncing an encrypted signal off a chain of hidden relay buoys that led back to human space. After a tense minute of static, a gruff voice answered. "This is Fleet Command. Identify yourself. Over." "This is Petty Officer Jack Harper, ID code Tango 73 November X-ray, requesting priority communication with Admiral Chen." There was a pause, then standby for verification. Jack waited, his heart pounding. He was about to disobey nearly every protocol in the book. But if anyone would understand, it would be Admiral Chen. The woman was a legend in the fleet, known for her unorthodox tactics and unwavering moral compass. "Harper." Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the comm. "What's your situation?" Jack took a deep breath. "Ma'am, I've discovered something big. A Zarkai slave camp, at least 1,000 Lyrian prisoners. I'm sending you the data now." He uploaded his gathered intelligence as he continued speaking. "Admiral, I know my orders were to observe and report, but I can't just leave these people here. I'm requesting permission to attempt a rescue operation." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. When Chen finally spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of command. "Harper, what you're proposing is incredibly risky, not just for you, but potentially for Earth if this goes sideways. Are you absolutely certain you can pull this off?" Jack's jaw clenched. "No, ma'am. I'm not certain. But I am sure that if we do nothing, thousands of innocents will continue to suffer. Sometimes we have to take risks to do what's right. Another long pause. Then, all right, Harper, you have provisional approval for this operation. But understand this. Officially, you're on your own. If you're captured, we'll disavow any knowledge of your actions. This is completely off the books. Understood, Admiral. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, son. Just come back alive. And bring our Lyrian friends home. Chen out. The communication ended, leaving Jack alone with the enormity of the task ahead. He looked out over the slave camp, his resolve hardening. Tomorrow, he would make contact with the Lyrian prisoners. Together, they would strike a blow against the Zarkai Empire and show the galaxy what one determined human could accomplish. As night fell on Krellmine, Jack began his final preparations. Whatever happened next would change the course of his life, and potentially, the fate of two species. The real work was just beginning. Unexpected allies. The acrid air of Krellmine burned in Jack's lungs as he crept through the shadows at the edge of the Zarkai compound. His stealth suit, a marvel of human engineering, bent light around him, rendering him nearly invisible to both sensors and the naked eye. Still, he moved with extreme caution. One mistake, one misplaced step, and the entire mission would be over before it began. Jack's target was a small maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the compound's energy barrier. His scans had revealed it as a potential weak point, a rare flaw in the Zarkai's otherwise impenetrable defenses. As he approached the concealed entrance, Jack's mind raced through the risks ahead. He wasn't just risking his own life now, but potentially sparking an interstellar incident. The fate of the Lyrian prisoners, and perhaps the delicate peace between humanity and the Zarkai Empire, rested on his shoulders. With practiced ease, Jack bypassed the tunnel's rudimentary security systems. The Zarkai, arrogant in their technological superiority, had grown lax in areas they deemed insignificant. It was a weakness Jack intended to exploit to its fullest. The tunnel was cramped and dank, forcing Jack to crouch as he made his way deeper into the heart of the compound. The distant hum of machinery grew louder, punctuated by the occasional bark of Zarkai overseers. Jack's jaw clenched at the sound. He had seen the cruelty of the Zarkai firsthand during his observations, and it had only strengthened his resolve. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Jack reached a maintenance hatch that, according to his intelligence, opened into one of the Lyrian barracks. He paused, taking a moment to center himself. Everything hinged on what happened next. With a deep breath, Jack disengaged his stealth field and opened the hatch. He emerged into a dimly lit room filled with rows of simple cots. Dozens of Lyrians, their iridescent skin dulled by fatigue and malnutrition, turned to stare at him with a mixture of fear and confusion. Jack raised his hand slowly, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, hoping his universal translator was working correctly. "I'm human, and I'm here to help." A ripple of whispers passed through the gathered Lyrians. One of them, a tall female with striking violet eyes, stepped forward. A human. Here. Her voice was melodic, even through the translator. "How is this possible?" "My name is Jack Harper," he replied, keeping his voice low. "I'm a scout for the Earth Fleet. I discovered this place by accident, but now I'm here to get you out." The female Lyrian's eyes narrowed. One human against an entire Zarkai garrison. This is madness. Or a trick. Jack couldn't blame them for their skepticism. "I know it sounds impossible, but I have a plan. What I need now is your help. Your people's abilities could turn the tide." Another Lyrian, this one older with silvery hair, joined the conversation. "Our abilities are suppressed. The Zarkai use neural inhibitors to block our psychic powers." Jack nodded, having expected as much. "I've developed a device that should be able to temporarily disable those inhibitors, but I need to know if you're willing to fight. This won't be easy, and I can't guarantee everyone's safety." The room fell silent as the Lyrians exchanged glances. Jack could almost feel the unspoken communication passing between them, remnants of their psychic abilities that even the inhibitors couldn't fully suppress. Finally, the violet-eyed female spoke again. "I am Lyra, and this is my father, Zen. We were leaders among our people before the Zarkai came. If you truly offer a chance at freedom, we will take it." Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Lyra. Zen, I promise I'll do everything in my power to get as many of you out of here as possible." Over the next few hours, as the compound's night cycle progressed, Jack outlined his plan to the Lyrian leaders. He explained the weaknesses he'd identified in the Zarkai security systems, the route he planned for their escape, and the role he hoped the Lyrians could play once their abilities were restored. "The key," Jack emphasized, "is to create as much chaos as possible. Once your powers are back online, I need you to sow confusion among the Zarkai. Make them see things that aren't there, cloud their minds, anything to keep them off balance while we make our escape." Zen nodded thoughtfully. "It's a bold plan, human. But even with our abilities restored, we are not warriors. The Zarkai are brutal and well-armed." "I know," Jack admitted. "That's why I'm going to arm you as best I can. I've brought a cache of non-lethal weapons, stun grenades, electromagnetic pulse emitters, that sort of thing. They should help even the odds without requiring you to take lives." Lyra's violet eyes flashed with determination. "We may not be warriors, human, but we have suffered under Zarkai cruelty for too long. Give us the means, and we will fight for our freedom." As the planning continued, Jack found himself increasingly impressed by the Lyrians. Despite their ordeal, they maintained a quiet dignity and a willingness to take great risks for their people. It reinforced his belief that he was doing the right thing, regardless of the potential consequences. As the night wore on, a sense of nervous anticipation filled the barracks. Word of the rescue plan spread among the Lyrians, passed in whispers and meaningful glances. Jack knew that the longer they waited, the greater the chance of discovery. They would need to act soon. Just before dawn, as the compound began to stir for another day of forced labor, Jack gathered the core group of Lyrians who would spearhead the escape. He distributed the weapons he'd smuggled in, showing them how to use the unfamiliar human technology. "Remember," he said, his voice tight with tension, "our primary goal is escape, not confrontation. Use these only if absolutely necessary." Lyra hefted one of the stun grenades, a determined set to her jaw. "We understand, Jack. We're ready." Jack nodded, then produced a small device from his pack. It was the size of his palm, covered in blinking lights. "This is the inhibitor disruptor. Once I activate it, you'll have your abilities back, but only for about an hour. We need to be well clear of the compound by then." Zen placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, his touch surprisingly warm. "Whatever happens next, human, know that you have given us something we had lost: hope." The simple statement hit Jack like a physical blow. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the enormous responsibility he had taken on. These weren't just nameless aliens he was trying to save. They were people with hopes and dreams and families. He couldn't let them down. "Okay," Jack said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Let's do this." With a deep breath, he activated the inhibitor disruptor. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like a wave crashing over them, the Lyrians gasped in unison. Their dull skin began to glow, faint at first, but quickly growing brighter. The air itself seemed to hum with energy. Lyra's eyes, already striking, now blazed with an inner fire. "By the ancestors," she whispered, "I had almost forgotten what this felt like." Jack allowed them a moment to reconnect with their restored abilities, but time was of the essence. "We need to move now. Lyra, Zen, take your teams and start creating distractions. Remember the plan: confusion and chaos, not direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary." The Lyrians nodded, their faces set with determination. As they filed out of the barracks, Jack turned to the small group that would accompany him to the compound's main control center. This was where he would disable the energy barrier and open an escape route. "Stay close," he instructed, activating his stealth field. "I'll clear the way. Use your abilities to mask our approach as best you can." With that, the small band of rebels moved out into the corridors of the slave compound. The first phase of their daring escape plan was underway. In the distance, alarms began to sound as the Zark realized something was very, very wrong. Jack allowed himself a grim smile. The real challenge was just beginning, but for the first time since he discovered this hellish place, he felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever happened next, he knew he was no longer fighting alone. Human and Lyrian, united against a common foe, it was a partnership that might just change the course of galactic history. As they rounded a corner, the first group of Zarkai guards came into view. Jack raised his weapon, ready to fight for the freedom of his new allies. The next few hours would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of human-alien relations. With grim determination, he stepped forward to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. The Great Escape. The corridors of the Zarkai compound erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, their harsh wails echoing off cold metal walls as confused shouts and the pounding of heavy footsteps filled the air. Jack led his small team of Lyrians through the mayhem, his stealth suit allowing him to move unseen, while the aliens used their newly restored psychic abilities to cloud the minds of any Zarkai who got too close. "This way," Jack whispered, gesturing towards a junction ahead. According to the schematics he'd memorized, it would lead them directly to the compound's main control center. As they approached, a squad of Zarkai guards rounded the corner, their reptilian features twisted in confusion and anger. Without hesitation, Jack raised his weapon and fired. A burst of electromagnetic energy crackled through the air, striking the lead guard. The Zarkai's armor sparked and sputtered, its systems overloaded. The alien collapsed, twitching. "Now," Jack shouted to his Lyrian companions. Zen stepped forward, his eyes glowing with psychic energy. He raised his hands, and suddenly the remaining guards froze in place, their eyes glazing over. "I've trapped them in an illusion," Zen explained, his voice strained with effort. "But I can't hold it for long." They rushed past the immobilized Zarkai, Jack pausing only to relieve them of their weapons. He distributed the alien blasters among the Lyrians. "Use these if you have to, but remember, we're here to escape, not start a war." As they continued towards the control center, evidence of Lyra's team's handiwork became apparent. Zarkai guards stumbled about in confusion, some firing at enemies only they could see. Others cowered in corners, their minds overwhelmed by psychic assaults. "Your people are incredible," Jack murmured to Zen as they ducked into an alcove to avoid a particularly frantic group of guards. The older Lyrian managed a tired smile. "We are a peaceful race by nature, but when pushed, we can be formidable. I only hope this violence doesn't change us irreparably." Jack nodded solemnly. He understood the weight of what he was asking these people to do. It was a burden he would carry long after this mission was over. Finally, they reached the control center. The thick doors were sealed shut, a testament to Zarkai paranoia. Jack pulled a small device from his pack, a human-made hacking tool that had proved effective against Zarkai systems in the past. "Cover me," he instructed the Lyrians as he set to work on the door's control panel. Moments stretched into agonizing minutes as Jack worked, acutely aware of the sounds of battle drawing nearer. Just as the first Zarkai rounded the far corner of the corridor, the doors slid open with a hiss. "Inside, now," Jack shouted, laying down suppressing fire to cover the Lyrians' retreat. The control center was a hive of activity. Zarkai technicians scrambled to make sense of the chaos unfolding throughout the compound. They turned in shock at the intrusion, reaching for weapons. But the Lyrians were faster. With a collective psychic push, they sent the Zarkai flying backwards, crashing into consoles and walls. Jack rushed to the main control terminal, his fingers flying over the alien interface. "Zen, I need you here," he called out. "I can read some of this, but I need your help to make sense of it all." The Lyrian elder joined him, his glowing eyes scanning the displays. Together, they began the process of dismantling the compound's defenses. Force fields fell, automated turrets powered down, and communication channels scrambled. "We've done it," Zen breathed, a note of awe in his voice. "The compound is defenseless." Jack allowed himself a moment of elation before refocusing on the task at hand. Now for Phase 2. We need to send the signal to Lyra's team and open the main gates. As if on cue, Lyra's voice crackled over the comm device Jack had given her. "Jack, we're in position, but we're taking heavy fire." "How much longer?" "Hang on," Jack replied, his fingers dancing across the alien controls. "Almost there." "Got it." Throughout the compound, doors began to slide open. The sound of thousands of feet pounding against metal flooring filled the air as Lyrian prisoners, guided by Lyra's team, made a mad dash for freedom. "We need to move," Jack said, turning to Zen and the others. "The Zarkai will regroup soon, and we don't want to be here when they do." They exited the control center, joining the flood of escaping Lyrians. The corridors were a sea of shimmering, iridescent bodies, all moving with singular purpose towards the promise of freedom. Jack's heart swelled at the sight. This was why he had risked everything. But their victory was far from assured. As they neared the main gates, the sound of weapons fire intensified. A group of Zarkai, more organized than the others they'd encountered, had set up a defensive position blocking the exit. "This is it," Jack shouted over the din. "One last push and we're out. Zen, can your people give us some cover?" The Lyrian nodded, his face set with determination. He conferred quickly with the other psychics in their group, and suddenly the air in front of them seemed to ripple and distort. "An illusion," Zen explained. "To the Zarkai, it will appear as if the corridor is empty." Under the cover of the psychic illusion, Jack led the charge. They burst through the Zarkai line before the aliens even realized what was happening. In the confusion, more Lyrians poured through the gap, overwhelming the defenders through sheer numbers. And then suddenly, they were outside. The harsh Krell-9 sun beat down on them, its rays cutting through the planet's toxic atmosphere. In the distance, Jack could see his ship where he had left it hidden in a ravine. "This way," he shouted, gesturing towards the ship. "It's our only way off this rock." But as the first group of Lyrians reached the ship, Jack's heart sank. It was large for a scout vessel, but nowhere near big enough to accommodate all the escaped prisoners. He had known this might be a problem, had hoped to find a solution in the Zarkai hangar, but in the chaos of the escape, that plan had fallen by the wayside. Lyra appeared at his side, her violet eyes wide with concern. "Jack, what's wrong? We need to leave now." He turned to her, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. "The ship, it can't hold everyone. We'll have to make multiple trips, but that will take time we don't have." Understanding dawned on Lyra's face, followed quickly by resolve. "Then we'll buy you that time." Before Jack could protest, Lyra was already organizing the stronger Lyrians into a defensive perimeter. Those with the most potent psychic abilities began creating illusions to confuse any pursuing Zarkai, while others used their newfound weapons to set up firing positions. "Get as many as you can onto the ship," Lyra instructed Jack. "We'll hold them off until you can return for the rest." Jack wanted to argue, to find another way, but he knew she was right. It was the only chance they had. "I'll be back," he promised. "Just hold on." As he began loading the first group of Lyrians onto his ship, the sound of battle erupted once more. The Zarkai, having regrouped, were launching a counterattack. Jack worked faster, his hands shaking with adrenaline, as he helped the weakest and most injured prisoners aboard. Just as he was preparing for takeoff, a massive explosion rocked the ground. Jack looked out to see a Zarkai gunship descending from the clouds, its weapons blazing. Lyrian defenses crumbled under the assault, and for a moment, Jack feared all was lost. But then, something incredible happened. The remaining Lyrians, led by Lyra and Zen, joined their minds in a massive psychic surge. The very air seemed to ripple with the force of their combined will. The Zarkay gunship faltered, its pilots clearly struggling against some unseen force. With a deafening crash, the ship plummeted to the ground, buying the escapees precious minutes. Jack knew it was now or never. With a heavy heart, he sealed the ship's hatch, leaving hundreds of Lyrians still on the planet's surface. "I'll be back," he said again, more to himself than anyone else. "I swear it." The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them off the barren surface of Krell-9. As they ascended through the atmosphere, Jack could see the Zarkay compound growing smaller, the figures of Lyrians and their captors reduced to tiny specks. In the passenger compartment, the rescued Lyrians huddled together, their earlier elation now tempered by concern for those left behind. Jack set the autopilot for a course back to human space, then turned to address his passengers. "I know you're worried," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But I promise you, we will return for the others. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." As the ship broke free of Krell-9's atmosphere and entered the vast expanse of space, Jack allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had struck a blow against the Zarkay Empire, freed hundreds of slaves, and forged an alliance that could change the face of galactic politics. But the cost had been high, and the fight was far from over. Jack settled into the pilot's seat, already planning their next move. The Lyrians left on Krell-9 were counting on him, and he wouldn't let them down. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them. For now, though, he had a ship full of refugees to get to safety and a report to make to Admiral Chen. As Krell-9 faded into the distance behind them, Jack set his jaw with determination. The real work, he knew, was just beginning. A race against time. The sleek human scout ship cut through the inky blackness of space, its engines pushed to their limits. Inside the cramped cockpit, Jack Harper's fingers danced across the control panels, his eyes darting between the navigational displays and the rear scanners. Every few seconds, he glanced back at the passenger compartment, where dozens of rescued Lyrians huddled together, their iridescent skin dimmed by exhaustion and worry. "How much longer?" Zen asked, his normally melodious voice strained with concern. The Lyrian elder had insisted on staying by Jack's side, leaving his daughter Lyra to comfort the other refugees. Jack checked the nav computer again. "We're still about 6 hours out from the nearest human outpost, but that's not what I'm worried about." He gestured to the rear scanners. "Look." Zen leaned in, his glowing eyes widening as he took in the display. 3 large blips were steadily gaining on their position. "Zarkay pursuit ships," he breathed. "Exactly," Jack confirmed grimly. "And a lot bigger than this scout vessel. We've got maybe an hour before they're in weapons range." The Lyrian's face fell. "Then, we failed. After everything, we'll be recaptured?" Jack shook his head firmly. "Not if I can help it. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve yet." He keyed the ship's intercom. "Lyra, I need you up here. Bring anyone with strong telekinetic abilities." Moments later, Lyra entered the cockpit, followed by 2 other Lyrians. Their faces were drawn with fatigue, but determination burned in their eyes. "What do you need, Jack?" Lyra asked. The human pilot gestured to the approaching Zarkay ships. "Those bastards are gaining on us. This ship wasn't built for extended high-speed chases, but if you can give the engines a telekinetic boost." Understanding dawned on Lyra's face. "We can try. But Jack, we're all exhausted. I don't know how long we can maintain it." "Every minute counts," Jack assured her. "Just do what you can." The Lyrians nodded, then closed their eyes in concentration. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, Jack felt the ship begin to accelerate. The engine readout spiked, showing power outputs well beyond their normal capabilities. "It's working," Jack exclaimed. Keep it up." For the next hour, they played a deadly game of cat and mouse through the star-studded void. The Lyrians strained to maintain their telekinetic push, while Jack used every piloting trick he knew to stay ahead of their pursuers. They skimmed the edges of asteroid fields, used the gravity wells of gas giants to slingshot themselves forward, and at one point even skimmed the corona of a star in a desperate bid to shake off the Zarkai. But despite their best efforts, the pursuing ships continued to gain ground. Jack could see the toll the constant psychic exertion was taking on the Lyrians. Sweat beaded on their brows, and their normally vibrant skin had taken on a sickly pallor. "We can't keep this up much longer," Zen said, voicing what they all knew. "The others are at their limits." Jack nodded grimly. He had hoped to avoid this, but they were out of options. "All right, new plan. There's a nebula about 10 minutes ahead at our current speed. If we can make it there, we might be able to lose them in the gas clouds." Lyra, her voice weak with exhaustion, spoke up. "But Jack, won't the nebula interfere with our systems too? We could be flying blind." "It's a risk we'll have to take," Jack replied. "Right now, it's our only chance." With renewed determination, the Lyrians pushed themselves to their absolute limits. The ship surged forward, the stars outside blurring into streaks of light. Behind them, the Zarkai ships opened fire, energy beams lancing through the void. "Brace yourselves," Jack shouted as he threw the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers. The hull shuddered as near misses superheated the metal, but somehow they avoided a direct hit. Just when it seemed their luck had run out, the nebula loomed before them, a vast, swirling cloud of gas and cosmic dust painted in ethereal shades of purple and blue. Jack aimed the ship straight for the densest part of the cloud. "Hold on to something," he warned as they plunged into the nebula. Instantly, the ship's systems went haywire. Sensors flickered and died, communications dissolved into static, and even the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Jack was flying purely on instinct now, relying on his years of experience and the faint visual cues visible through the cockpit window. Behind them, the Zarkai ships hesitated at the edge of the nebula. Their larger size and more complex systems made them even more vulnerable to the nebula's interference. For a precious few minutes, the pursuers hung back, giving Jack and the Lyrians a chance to put some distance between them. But the respite was short-lived. Soon, the ominous shapes of the Zarkai vessels appeared in the swirling gases behind them, distorted but unmistakable. "They're still coming," Zen observed, his voice tight with fear. Jack gritted his teeth. "Then we'll just have to go deeper." He pushed the ship further into the nebula, navigating through swirling eddies of gas and around chunks of protostellar matter. The Lyrians clung to whatever handholds they could find as the ship bucked and rolled. Suddenly, a massive shape loomed out of the cosmic mist directly ahead of them. Jack barely had time to register the craggy surface of an enormous asteroid before he had to wrench the controls hard to avoid a collision. They skimmed the surface of the space rock with mere meters to spare. The near miss gave Jack an idea. "Lyra," he called out, "can you and the others sense those asteroids? Even if our sensors can't pick them up?" The Lyrian woman closed her eyes for a moment, reaching out with her psychic senses. "Yes," she replied, her eyes snapping open. "It's faint, but I can feel them." "Good," Jack said, "because I've got a crazy idea." Over the next few minutes, Jack outlined his plan. It was risky, borderline suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. The Lyrians, despite their exhaustion, agreed to help. With Lyra and the other psychics acting as living sensor arrays, Jack began to navigate a treacherous path through a dense asteroid field hidden within the nebula. They'd weave between massive rocks, some the size of small moons, relying on the Lyrians' abilities to avoid catastrophic collisions. Behind them, the Zarkai ships followed, but their larger size made navigating the asteroid field far more challenging. Jack watched with grim satisfaction as one of the pursuing vessels clipped an asteroid, sending it spinning out of control. But they weren't out of danger yet. The remaining Zarkai ships were still in pursuit, and the constant strain of psychic navigation was taking its toll on the Lyrians. Jack knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. That's when he saw it, a gap in the asteroid field, leading to a clear path out of the nebula. Freedom was tantalizingly close, but so were their pursuers. One last push, Jack urged his Lyrian allies. We're almost there. Summoning the last reserves of their strength, the Lyrians reached out with their minds. Jack felt the ship surge forward, as if caught in an invisible current. They burst out of the asteroid field with the Zarkai hot on their heels. But Jack had one last trick up his sleeve. As they cleared the nebula, he initiated a pre-programmed sequence he had prepared for just such an emergency. Every probe, beacon, and piece of expendable equipment on the ship launched simultaneously, each broadcasting a copy of the ship's signal. In an instant, the space around them was filled with dozens of false signatures. The Zarkai ships, their sensors still recovering from the nebula's interference, hesitated in confusion. That moment of hesitation was all Jack needed. He fired up the faster-than-light drive, something he hadn't dared use in the nebula. There was a moment of gut-wrenching disorientation as space itself seemed to bend around them. Then, in a flash of pseudo-motion, they were gone, leaving the frustrated Zarkai far behind. As the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, a weary cheer went up from the Lyrians. They had done it. Against all odds, they had escaped the Zarkai's clutches. But Jack couldn't bring himself to celebrate just yet. His thoughts were with the hundreds of Lyrians still trapped on Krell 9, counting on him to return. And he knew that this daring escape would have consequences. The Zarkai wouldn't take this lying down. As the ship hurtled through hyperspace towards human territory, Jack turned to Zen and Lyra. "We made it," he said, allowing himself a small smile. "But this is just the beginning. Are you ready for what comes next?" The two Lyrians exchanged a look, then nodded solemnly. "We're with you, Jack," Lyra said, speaking for all of them. "Whatever it takes." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had started something here, something that could change the course of galactic history. There would be challenges ahead, diplomatic, military, and moral. But looking at the freed Lyrians, seeing the hope in their eyes, he knew it was worth it. As the scout ship raced towards human space and an uncertain future, Jack allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He had taken a stand, had refused to look away from injustice. Whatever came next, he would face it knowing he had done the right thing. The real work, the hard work, was just beginning. But for now, as the rescued Lyrians finally allowed themselves to rest, Jack Harper knew one thing for certain. The universe would never be the same again. A new beginning. The sleek human scout ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a flash of pseudo-motion, the starfield outside the viewports suddenly resolving into recognizable constellations. Jack Harper let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They had made it to human space. "Welcome to the Arcturus system," Jack announced to the weary Lyrians gathered in the ship's main compartment, home to one of humanity's largest off-world colonies and the headquarters of the Earth fleet in this sector. Zen moved to stand beside Jack, his aged eyes wide with wonder as he took in the view. The massive form of a space station dominated the foreground, its spinning habitation rings glittering with thousands of lights. Beyond it, the blue-green orb of Arcturus Prime hung suspended in the void, looking uncannily like Earth from this distance. "It's beautiful," Zen breathed. "So different from our own worlds. And yet, there's something familiar about it." Jack nodded, understanding the sentiment. Life finds a way, no matter where in the galaxy you go. He turned to the communications panel, steeling himself for what came next. But now comes the hard part. With a deep breath, Jack opened a channel to Arcturus Control. "This is Earth Fleet Scout Ship Hermes requesting emergency docking. Authorization code Tango 73 November X-ray." There was a moment of tense silence before a crisp, professional voice responded. Herms, this is Arcturus Control. Your authorization is confirmed, but you're 3 weeks overdue. What's your situation? Jack glanced at the Lyrians, then back to the comm. Control, I'm declaring a code Omega. I have approximately 50 refugees aboard in need of immediate medical attention. Request secure channel to Admiral Chen. The pause that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Jack could almost imagine the frantic activity his words must have sparked in Arcturus Control. A code Omega was reserved for situations with potential galaxy-altering ramifications. Finally, the controller's voice returned, noticeably more tense. Understood, Herms. You are cleared for priority docking at Bay 17. Medical teams will be standing by. Secure channel to Admiral Chen is being established. As the ship began its approach to the massive station, the main view screen flickered to life. Admiral Chen's weathered face appeared, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. Harper, she said without preamble, I hope you have one hell of an explanation for this. Over the next few minutes, as the Herms maneuvered into its assigned docking bay, Jack gave the Admiral a concise but thorough briefing on the events of the past weeks. To her credit, Chen listened without interruption, her expression growing graver with each passing moment. As Jack finished his report, Chen let out a long, weary sigh. You've started a war, Harper. You know that, right? Jack nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am. But it's a war that needed to be fought. The Zarkei can't be allowed to continue enslaving entire species. Chen's eyes flickered to the Lyrians visible behind Jack. Her expression softened slightly. No, I suppose they can't. Well, what's done is done. Now we need to deal with the consequences. She straightened, once more every inch the commanding officer. Bring your refugees to Briefing Room 1 as soon as you dock. I'll meet you there with a full medical team and a diplomatic corps. We need to get ahead of this before the Zarkei come knocking on our door. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. As soon as the Herms docked, medical teams swarmed aboard, efficiently triaging and treating the Lyrian refugees. Jack found himself swept along in a tide of debriefings, medical examinations, and hurried conferences. Through it all, he stuck close to Zen and Lyra, determined to ensure that the Lyrians' voices were heard in the chaos of human bureaucracy. It wasn't until late into the station's night cycle that Jack found himself alone with Admiral Chen in her private office, the immediate crisis finally under control. You've stirred up one hell of a hornet's nest, Harper, Chen said, pouring them both a measure of amber liquid from a bottle on her desk. The Zarkei ambassador is already howling for your head, claiming you violated their sovereign territory and kidnapped their laborers. The disgust in her voice at the Zarkei's euphemisms was palpable. Jack accepted the drink but didn't sip it. And what's the official response? Chen's lips twisted into a grim smile. Officially, we're investigating these serious allegations. Unofficially, we're mobilizing the fleet. If the Zarkei want to fight, they'll get one. Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and trepidation. And the Lyrians? What about those we left behind on Krellmine? The Admiral's expression softened. We're doing everything we can. I've already dispatched a stealth recon team to assess the situation. As for the refugees here, she trailed off, taking a sip of her drink. That's where things get complicated. How so? Jack asked, leaning forward. Chen set down her glass, her face serious. The Lyrian government has officially requested asylum for their people. They're mobilizing their own forces, but they're asking for our help. They want an alliance, Harper, a full military partnership against the Zarkei. Jack's mind raced with the implications. An alliance between humans and Lyrians could shift the balance of power in the sector dramatically, but it would also irrevocably commit Earth to a conflict with the Zarkei Empire. What's the Council saying? He asked, referring to Earth's governing body. Chen's expression turned wry. They're divided, of course. Some see this as an opportunity to establish humanity as a major player in galactic politics. Others fear we're not ready for a full-scale interstellar war. She fixed Jack with a penetrating stare. A lot is riding on your testimony, Harper. The council wants to hear from you directly before they make their decision. Jack felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. His actions had set all of this in motion. Now the fate of 2 species, maybe more, could hinge on his words. "When do we leave for Earth?" he asked. "First thing tomorrow," Chen replied. "But before that, there's someone who wants to see you." As if on cue, the door to Chen's office slid open. Lyra stepped in, her iridescent skin now glowing with renewed vitality after proper medical treatment. Behind her came Zen and several other Lyrian elders. "Jack," Lyra said, her melodious voice filled with emotion, "we wanted to thank you. Without your courage, we would still be slaves. You've given us back our freedom, our dignity." Zen stepped forward, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "More than that, you've given us hope. Hope for our people, and hope for a future where species like ours and yours can stand together against tyranny." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. "I just did what was right," he managed to say. Lyra shook her head, a sad smile on her face. "You did more than that. You risked everything for people you barely knew. That's not just right, it's extraordinary." Her expression turned serious. "But our fight isn't over. There are still thousands of our people enslaved by this Archi. We need your help, Jack. We need humanity's help." Jack looked from the Lyrians to Admiral Chen, and back again. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. The path ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and uncertain outcomes. But it was the right path. "You'll have it," he said firmly. "I'll speak to the council. I'll tell them everything. And I'll make them understand why we need to stand with you." The relief and gratitude on the Lyrians' faces was palpable. Lyra stepped forward and, to Jack's surprise, embraced him. "Thank you," she whispered. As the impromptu meeting broke up, plans being made for the journey to Earth, Jack found himself standing alone by the viewport in Chen's office. The vast expanse of space stretched out before him, stars twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, the Zarkei were no doubt preparing for war. The Lyrians left behind on Krellmine were fighting for survival, and humanity stood on the precipice of a new era. Admiral Chen joined him at the viewport, her reflection visible in the transparent aluminum. "You know," she said quietly, "when I gave you permission for that rescue mission, I never imagined it would lead to this." Jack nodded, his eyes still fixed on the stars. "Neither did I. But now that we're here, I can't imagine having done anything differently." Chen was silent for a moment, then said, "You've changed the course of history, Harper. For better or worse, nothing will be the same after this." As Jack contemplated her words, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and resolve settle over him. The challenges ahead were daunting, but he was ready to face them. He had seen the best of humanity in himself, and the best of alien kind in the Lyrians. Together, perhaps they could forge a better future for the galaxy. "No," Jack agreed, turning to face the Admiral with determination in his eyes. "Nothing will be the same, but maybe, just maybe, it'll be better." As they prepared for the journey to Earth and the momentous decisions that lay ahead, Jack Harper knew that this was just the beginning. The real work, of building alliances, of fighting injustice, of reshaping the galaxy, was just beginning. But for the first time in a long while, he felt truly optimistic about the future. The stars beckoned, full of challenges and opportunities, and humanity, hand in hand with their new Lyrian allies, was ready to answer the call.